A child bound and freezing in a rotting shack miles from any road, left to die in silence in snow and fear. No food, no voice left to scream, only a whisper, a final breath the wind almost carried away. And no one came. Until a shadow moved through the storm. 4 legs, a scarred back, eyes trained to protect. They called him dead, but Atlas, a retired police dog, wasn't done saving lives. What happened next will break your heart and then put it back together stronger than before. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. And if you believe no soul animal or human deserves to be abandoned, hit subscribe. Because this is not just a story, it's a reminder that even in the coldest snow, hope still walks on 4 legs. Cascade County, Washington had never looked more like a postcard, and never been more deadly. The pine-covered mountains lay silent under a fresh burial of snow, the wind carving narrow paths between the trunks like unseen hands. Temperatures had plunged below zero after 3 straight days of storm, and now, as dusk neared, the world seemed caught in an eternal breath, still white and watching. From the ridge above a forgotten gully, a shadow moved. 4 legs pushed through knee-high snowdrifts, slow and sure. The creature was large, its coat once a gleaming saddle of black and tan, now matted with ice and dirt. His name was Atlas. 8 years old. A retired German Shepherd K9 unit trained for search and rescue, narcotics detection and protection. But now he wore no badge, no harness, only an old weathered tag half buried beneath his fur, engraved with a name that no longer had a partner to call it. Atlas was limping. His left hind leg dragged slightly, a result of the car crash that had supposedly killed him and his handler, Deputy Alan Kerr, 3 months ago. The town had buried Alan. They had assumed Atlas died with him. But Atlas had survived, thrown from the wreckage into the cold, injured and alone. No one had looked for him. No one cared. But he had followed something deeper than instinct. A bond, a scent, a memory. Now the scent changed. Faint, human, young. He paused, ears tilting forward. Beneath the hiss of wind, something fragile stirred the air. A whimper. Atlas moved. The shack lay half collapsed. Its roof caved in, leaning like a drunkard against a broken pine. It hadn't been a home in decades. Now it was a prison. Snow blanketed the structure except for a small path freshly carved as if someone had been dragged. The door creaked in the wind. Atlas pushed it open with his shoulder. Inside, darkness pressed close. A damp, foul smell clung to the air, mildew, old wood rope. And something else. Fear. In the far corner, curled up like discarded clothing, was a child. Owen Bennett was 7 years old, thin, pale. His cheeks were hollowed from hunger, his lips cracked and blue. His light brown hair clung to his forehead with sweat that had long turned cold. He wore only a flannel shirt and jeans, no jacket, no gloves, no boots. His wrists were bound behind him with coarse rope arms twisted painfully. His small face twitched in his sleep, as if even dreams could not offer escape. Atlas approached, paused silent. He lowered his head and nudged the boy's cheek. Owen stirred. He didn't speak. He didn't open his eyes. But a single tear escaped the corner of his lid and froze instantly on his skin. Atlas sniffed. The boy's scent was recent. Someone had left him here probably no more than 12 hours ago. But at this temperature, 12 hours was the difference between life and death. With practiced precision, Atlas positioned his jaws around the rope and began to chew. The rope had stiffened from the cold, but it gave way under the strength of trained teeth. When the final strand snapped, Owen collapsed forward like a marionette with its strings cut. Atlas nudged him again. A weak moan. The boy was alive, barely. Atlas stepped around and crouched low, offering his back. It wasn't instinct, it was memory. Countless drills. Countless rescues. People lifted. Children saved. He had done it with Alan. He would do it again. It took several tries, but the boy's limp body eventually slumped over Atlas's shoulders. The weight was light, too light. The boy hadn't eaten in days. Atlas adjusted his stance and pushed out into the storm once more. The wind howled, snow slashed sideways. But Atlas did not turn back. He moved through the darkening woods like a myth come to life, silent, purposeful, carrying the weight of one soul and the ghost of another. Somewhere in the distance, headlights flickered behind the trees, then vanished, watching. The snow kept falling, whispering like ash over the forest floor, as Atlas trudged forward with Owen's fragile body across his back. Each step sank into powder that reached past the dog's chest, and the cold clawed at his joints, especially the old injury in his rear leg. But Atlas didn't stop. The boy's shallow breath tickled the back of his neck, and that was reason enough to keep going. The trail sloped downward now, leading them into a narrow gully bordered by thick stands of pine and spruce. Somewhere ahead, Atlas didn't know how far was a human scent he remembered faintly, a man who had once helped search teams during wildfires and landslides. Not a police officer, not a hunter, but someone who had worn command in his voice. That man lived alone now. Nestled between two massive stone outcroppings, the cabin came into view like a lighthouse buried in snow. A chimney jutted from the roof, faint smoke curling skyward, dissolving in the gray. The building was made of thick cedar logs, weathered and stained dark by time and storms. One window glowed orange behind frostbitten glass. Light warmth, maybe safety. Atlas reached the front porch and let out a sharp bark. Inside, Nate Brennan stirred from his chair, a book slipping from his lap onto the hardwood floor. Nate was in his late 60s, tall and solid built, even beneath the layers of his wool sweater and flannel jacket. His beard was silver but trimmed close, and his face carried the angular tension of a man who used to issue orders with finality. His eyes, deep-set, gray-green, held the weariness of grief that had aged him more than the years ever could. Since the death of his teenage son in a freak flash flood 4 years earlier, Nate had withdrawn from town life. Once a decorated fire captain known for charging headfirst into danger, he now preferred the quiet groan of trees in winter to human conversation. He didn't answer calls. He didn't write back. Even when the firehouse invited him to a memorial service last summer, Nate had stayed home and split wood in silence. But when he opened the door and saw what stood on his porch, that silence broke. Atlas stood in the snow flanks, heaving from exertion, legs trembling but holding firm. Draped across his back was a half-frozen boy, pale and limp head lolling forward. "Jesus," Nate muttered, stepping forward. Hey, what the hell?" He reached for the child, lifting him from the dog's back with practiced care. His large hands, calloused and strong, softened instinctively as he cradled Owen against his chest. The boy's skin was ice, his flannel shirt soaked, lips blue. "Get inside." Nate ordered the dog, half out of habit and half in awe that the animal obeyed. Inside the cabin, Nate moved quickly. He cleared the sofa with a sweep of his arm, laid Owen down, and wrapped him in the nearest thick wool blanket. Then he knelt and checked his pulse-breathing pupil reaction. The routine came back like second nature. His hands moved efficiently, like he had with his son during the rescue attempts that came too late. Atlas stood near the door, watching every motion. The room was warm now, the heat from the cast-iron stove making his frozen fur start to steam. Water pooled beneath him. "You're a damn miracle," Nate muttered, shooting a glance toward the dog. "Where the hell did you come from?" He peeled away the blanket and examined Owen's arms for signs of deeper damage. That's when he noticed the wrists. There, burned into the boy's skin, were deep, angry welts, distinct rope marks, not fresh, several hours old, at least likely longer. And not just haphazardly tied. No, this was intentional, tight, cruel. Whoever had done this had meant for the child to stay tied and stay silent. Something in Nate's chest contracted. He reached for a first aid kit stored beneath the fireplace mantel, cleaned the skin with antiseptic, then began gently massaging the boy's fingers to stimulate circulation. Owen flinched barely. A breath. A flicker of life. "You're okay, kid," Nate said quietly. "You're safe now." He stood and turned to Atlas. The dog had sat down now, one ear, twitching eyes fixed on Owen. "I don't know where you came from," Nate said, "but you brought him here on purpose, didn't you?" Atlas didn't move, but his amber eyes didn't waver. Nate gave a tired, disbelieving laugh. "You carried him. Out there. Through that storm." He crouched beside the dog. Up close, Atlas looked even worse, ribs beginning to show beneath wet fur, a visible, limp, old scars matted by grime and ice. But there was something in the dog's posture and the solemn focus of his gaze that told Nate this was no ordinary stray. "You're one of those K9s, aren't you?" he murmured. "A working dog. A partner." Atlas let out a low, brief exhale, not quite a whine, but enough. Nate stood, rubbed a hand down his beard. A memory flared, a missing child case from 3 years ago. A girl named Lucy Darnell. Similar rope marks. Found 2 days after disappearing, dumped near the highway, bruised but alive. No suspect ever charged. The marks on her wrists looked almost identical to these. Something icy crept along Nate's spine. He turned back to Owen, now wrapped in a second blanket. The boy's fingers twitched. Then his lips parted. "Cold," he whispered, barely audible. "Shh," Nate said gently. "You're warm now. Just rest." The wind howled beyond the cabin walls, but inside, for the first time in days, warmth had returned to more than just the room. Outside, the storm had calmed, but the forest remained buried under a thick white hush. Long fingers of mist curled through the tree trunks, and the pines stood still like solemn witnesses. Inside the cabin, however, the quiet was uneasy, the kind of silence that followed someone trying to remember something too painful to say. Owen lay bundled on the couch, the wool blankets piled around his small frame like a cocoon. His cheeks had regained some color, and his breath no longer rattled in his chest. He stared at the ceiling as if tracing invisible shapes there, his lips barely moving. Atlas lay curled beside him, nose resting on his front paw, one ear always tilted toward the boy. The bond between them had formed fast, as if something unspoken had passed in those snow-covered woods. Nate Brennan stood at the window, coffee in hand, watching the trees. The old fire captain's posture was alert, but his mind was elsewhere. He hadn't slept much. After Owen passed out again the night before, Nate had dug out his box of case files from the hall closet. Not police records exactly, just newspaper clippings, notes, printouts he'd kept over the years of missing person cases in the county. Some he'd helped search for. Others, like Lucy Darnell, had haunted him long after. Now another boy, another rope, another scar. He turned back toward the couch. Owen's eyes blinked slowly. Then his mouth opened. There was a man, the boy whispered. Nate crouched beside him. What kind of man? Owen's brow furrowed. He smelled like smoke. Cigarettes. Always smoked. Even in the shed. Nate's jaw tightened. Did he have a name? Owen shook his head. He never said it. Just boy or quiet. And he drove a green truck. Atlas lifted his head then, his ears perked, body alert. The moment the words green truck left Owen's mouth, the German shepherd stood and walked toward the window, tail stiff, scanning the forest line. "You remember anything else?" Nate asked. Owen's lip quivered. He had a beard, like you, but messier. He locked the door from the outside. And laughed when I screamed. Nate reached for a notepad and wrote it all down. His handwriting was still blocky crisp, like in the firehouse logs, but his hand trembled slightly. Later that afternoon, while Owen rested again and Atlas resumed his quiet vigil, Nate pulled out an old portable cassette recorder from his closet. He kept it not for nostalgia, but because it still held a handful of tapes from his firefighting days, field interviews, reports, even some from the sheriff's office years ago when joint investigations overlapped. He popped in one of the tapes labeled March 11th Ridge Search Briefing and hit play. A crackle of static. Then the voice came. "This is Sheriff Danner. Case brief, still no sign of the K9 presumed dead after vehicle impact. Handler deceased on scene. German Shepherd registered as Atlas declared unrecoverable." Nate glanced up just in time to see Atlas rise abruptly. The dog stood frozen, his shoulders tensed. Then a low, guttural growl started deep in his throat. It wasn't a growl of fear. It was recognition. Atlas, Nate murmured. But the dog didn't respond. He was staring at the cassette deck, unmoving, his body stiff as if struck by lightning. A moment later, he let out a short, high-pitched whimper and backed up a step. "You know that voice, don't you?" Nate whispered. Atlas paced once in a tight circle, the scar on his flank twitching. Nate turned off the recorder. He sat still, staring at the old tape. So Sheriff Danner had declared Atlas dead, not retired, not transferred. Dead. And yet here, the dog stood alive, injured, and carrying a boy to safety through a storm. What else had the sheriff lied about? He pulled the file box closer and retrieved the photo from Lucy Darnell's case. Nate compared the bruising patterns on Lucy's arms to what he had seen on Owen. The similarities were chilling. Same knot impressions. Same directional bruising. Whoever had taken Owen had used the same method. Meanwhile, Owen stirred from the couch, sweat beading on his forehead. He tossed under the blankets and whimpered. Atlas immediately padded over and placed his muzzle gently on the boy's chest. Owen's breathing slowed, and he curled instinctively toward the dog. From the side room, Nate watched them both. Whatever had happened in the woods, Atlas had stayed, fought, and brought Owen back. Not as a pet, not out of instinct, but out of duty. The kind bred into K-9 officers even if the world had given up on them. As night began to fall, Nate turned on the front porch light. The sky outside glowed faint lavender under thick clouds. No footprints, no headlights down the trail, just trees, just silence. But beneath that silence, Nate now knew there were old lies buried under the snow and one scarred dog who refused to let them stay buried. The fog came early that morning, curling in heavy coils through the evergreens of Ridge Hollow like ghosts returning to haunt the living. It blanketed the old logging trail in a thick silence, swallowing the crunch of boots and the low, steady breath of a dog on alert. Atlas moved ahead with quiet precision, his nose low to the ground, every muscle coiled beneath his black and tan coat. His tail was stiff, not wagging. This wasn't a walk. It was a mission. Behind him, Nate Brennan followed, his flashlight beam cutting through the pale mist. He was dressed in his old fire department jacket, now faded and fraying at the cuffs. He carried an axe on one hip, not for protection, but to clear branches, though a part of him appreciated the weight. It made him feel less exposed. They were retracing Atlas's path from the night he found Owen. After the boy had mentioned the green truck and the shed, Nate had let Atlas sniff the boy's blanket again. Without hesitation, the German shepherd had turned toward the eastern woods, tail high steps swift. An hour and Atlas stopped. Nate squinted through the fog. Up ahead, half buried in the snow, was a collapsed wooden structure. It might have once been a hunting shed, but now it leaned at a dangerous angle, planks warped with rot and age. Atlas pawed at the ground near the entrance, then let out a short, sharp bark. Nate knelt beside him and brushed away a pile of snow. Beneath the frost, a bloodstain bloomed across the dirt floor, brownish red and unmistakably human. Next to it, frayed rope, and a scrap of fabric, a child-sized cloth napkin embroidered with delicate stitching, MJ. Nate turned it over in his glove. Initials, he muttered. This wasn't random. He pulled out his phone and took several photos, then dialed. Eliza Moore answered on the second ring. Officer Moore was in her early 30s with a commanding presence that didn't rely on volume. She stood just over 5'9", lean and well-trained with dark curls, usually pulled into a tight bun under her patrol cap. Her hazel eyes were sharp, always watching, always calculating. Eliza was one of the few officers in Brookridge County who had questioned authority more than once and paid for it. She arrived at Nate's cabin an hour later, boots still muddy-face tense. "You're sure the boy was here?" she asked after Nate showed her the photos. "Yes." Atlas led me straight to it. Blood, rope, and this. He handed her the napkin. "MJ," she murmured. "I've seen this stitching before. Martha Jean, she filed a missing persons report 2 months ago for her nephew Micah. I thought that case was closed," Nate said. "It was," Eliza replied bitterly. "Sheriff Danner said it was a custody dispute, not a real abduction. But this changes things." She turned serious. "But if we go forward with this, we need more than just suspicion." Especially because she stopped. Because of who Nate pressed. She hesitated. Then Gary Hudson. Nate felt a chill not from the air. Gary Hudson was a name people in Brookridge said with either reverence or fear. A local businessman who made millions in timber and construction, Gary was large in both build and influence. Mid-50s, always in a tailored coat, clean-shaven, with bright white teeth and a salesman's handshake. He donated generously to the police department and even funded the sheriff's re-election campaign. But rumors clung to him about how he treated his workers, about women gone missing near job sites. Nothing ever stuck. Eliza lowered her voice. "Micah's aunt." She said Gary's truck was seen near their trailer the night the boy vanished. Green Chevy dented rear fender. But again, Danner shut it down fast. Said there was no evidence. "And now we have rope and blood," Nate said. Eliza nodded. "And that makes you a problem." A beat of silence passed. Then she glanced at Atlas. "How is it he's still alive?" Nate shrugged. "You ever seen a K-9 like him?" "No," she admitted. "And if the sheriff knew he was alive?" "He will," Nate said. But Eliza wasn't ready to go directly to him. Instead, she took a detour. That night, after driving back into town, Eliza parked her cruiser on a quiet side street and stepped into a dim cafe near the bus depot. In the far corner sat a woman in a heavy knit sweater and a navy beanie typing on a battered laptop. Ellie Graves had the kind of look that didn't draw attention, early 40s, small-build brown eyes behind wireframe glasses, voice soft like rustling pages. but she had once worked for the Columbia Tribune and had nearly exposed a trafficking ring tied to law enforcement until threats drove her into freelance reporting. Eliza Ellie greeted, not looking up. "If you're here, something's wrong." Eliza slid into the seat opposite her. "You still have your source in Ashe County?" Ellie raised an eyebrow. "Depends. I think it's happening here," Eliza said, "or at least, it was." She laid out the facts: Owen Atlas, the shed, the initials, the sheriff's silence, and Hudson's connection. Ellie didn't interrupt, but her fingers tapped the keyboard as she listened. "I'll dig," she said finally. "But if Hudson's involved, we're going to need more than rope and rumors." "I'll get it," Eliza said. As she left, Ellie called out, "Watch your six." Eliza didn't answer, but her jaw set tight as she walked into the fog. The snow was falling again, silent and heavy, muffling the sounds of the world until all that remained was the soft rasp of branches creaking in the wind and the rhythmic breathing of sleep. Inside the cabin, the fire had settled into a warm bed of coals, casting dim orange light across the pine walls. Owen lay curled beneath a thick wool blanket on the makeshift cot Nate had built beside the hearth. His small frame had grown less rigid each night, but there were still moments when his fingers twitched, reaching for something or someone not there. Atlas slept beside him, one paw stretched out beneath the boy's hand. The dog's ears, though drooping in rest, twitched at the slightest sound, a sentinel even in slumber. Nate in the kitchen corner sat in a creaky wooden chair sipping stale coffee from a chipped mug. He hadn't shaved in 3 days. His graying beard had begun to catch the flicker of firelight, making him look older than his 52 years. Nate Brennan had once led search and rescue operations through some of the harshest terrain in Colorado. But after losing his son in a cabin fire 6 winters ago, a fire he couldn't reach in time, he had retreated from the world. His shoulders, once proud and upright, now hunched slightly as if bowed by grief too long carried. Yet something about Owen and Atlas's silent determination had stirred a flicker of purpose again. It was just past midnight when the dog stirred. First a low growl, then suddenly Atlas was on his feet, fur-bristling body rigid. He stepped forward, placing himself between the door and Owen, and let out a sound that wasn't quite a bark, more like a warning torn from the depths of his chest. Nate stood immediately, grabbing the old axe beside the hearth, heart pounding. Outside, snow crackled underfoot. A shadow moved past the front window, tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a dark coat. Whoever it was made no effort to knock. Atlas lunged toward the door, snarling, now teeth bared. Nate reached for the knob and yanked the door open. The figure was already turning, startled by the dog's growl. Under the moonlight, Nate caught only a glimpse, a black ski mask, gloved hands and boots leaving prints toward the trees. The stranger ran, slipping once before vanishing into the pines. Atlas darted forward but stopped just short of the threshold, growling into the night. Snow blew into the room like a ghost, uninvited. Nate quickly shut the door, bolting it with the iron bar. Owen had woken during the commotion, eyes wide and wet. That sound. "He's back," he whispered. "Who?" Nate asked gently. "The man with the smoke smell. He had gloves, always had gloves. Did he hurt you?" Owen hesitated, then shook his head. "Not me, but there was a girl." Nate sat beside him. "Tell me about her." "She had braids," Owen said, curling deeper under the blanket. "She cried when they put her in the car. A red one. They made her wear a blindfold. I never saw her again after that day. Do you remember her name?" Owen bit his lip, thinking hard. "I think Maddie, or May. She was younger, always scared." Nate reached over and gently rested his hand on Atlas's shoulder. The dog was still staring at the door, every muscle alert. The next morning the air was colder, the snow deeper, and the world outside the cabin felt more watchful. While Owen dozed, Nate grabbed his old coat and stepped outside with Atlas. The trail of footprints from the night before had already begun to fade, half swallowed by the wind. But what caught Nate's attention was something else, something he hadn't noticed before. A faint glint of metal embedded in the trunk of the tallest pine near the front porch. He walked toward it, brushing off snow. There, almost perfectly hidden by a knothole, was a tiny camera, weatherproof, battery-powered, and well-secured. Its lens was pointed directly at the cabin. It had been recording. Nate removed it with care and brought it inside. He booted up the old laptop that had survived his self-imposed exile. The camera had an internal memory card. It took a few minutes, but he managed to extract the footage. There, in silent black and white, he saw the snow-covered clearing, the stillness of the trees. Then, 2 nights prior, a shape appeared at the edge of the frame. A pickup truck. Dark green, slightly dented on the passenger side. Gary Hudson's. The timestamp on the footage confirmed it 48 hours ago, the same night Owen had nightmares so violent that Atlas had refused to leave his side. Nate leaned back in his chair, his breath caught between disbelief and fury. "Why would Gary Hudson come out here?" he muttered aloud. Atlas, lying nearby, growled softly as if answering. Nate opened his notebook, jotted down the time codes, and copied the footage to a USB drive. He didn't trust cloud storage. Not anymore. He sent a message to Eliza: "Footage found. Hudson's truck. Confirmed. Meet tonight." The reply came within minutes. "Yes, keep Owen safe." As the day wore on, Owen seemed unusually quiet. During lunch, he poked at his food but barely ate. Atlas stayed close, even nuzzling the boy once gently. Then, as Nate cleared the dishes, Owen spoke. "I heard the moon last night," he said. Nate paused. "What do you mean?" it screamed. Not out loud, but like, in my chest. "I think something bad is about to happen." Nate crouched to his level. "Nothing will happen to you while you're here, kiddo. Not while I'm breathing. And definitely not while Atlas is watching." The dog lifted his head, ears perked as if in solemn agreement. The frost hadn't lifted by dawn, and a strange tension rode on the wind, a sharp metallic edge that Atlas seemed to sense before any human did. He paced near the window, his nose twitching, eyes locked on the distant tree line as though something unseen were watching. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with urgency. Nate leaned over the old dining table, scattered with maps, photographs, and scribbled notes. Across from him sat Eliza Moore, her sandy blonde hair tied back into a no-nonsense braid. She was 35, tall and wiry, with sharp eyes and a voice trained to command. Despite the exhaustion shadowing her face, she carried herself with the steel of someone who had fought too long to give up now. The badge on her coat was hidden, off-duty, unofficial, and yet fully in charge. Next to her was Ellie Graves, the freelance journalist who had once uncovered a trafficking ring in neighboring Summit County, only to find her apartment broken into and her name quietly smeared in media circles. Ellie was in her early 40s with close-cropped black curls, wide-set brown eyes, and an angular jaw. She wore thrift store boots, a threadbare parka, and a messenger bag covered in sewn patches of resistance slogans. Her demeanor was brisk, a little mistrustful, but deeply committed. Owen sat on a chair pulled close to the fire, his knees curled up, one hand on Atlas's back. The other held a small voice recorder passed gently to him by Eliza. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to," she said. Owen nodded slowly. His voice was a whisper at first. It was always night when he came. "I think he liked it better that way." Ellie clicked her pen. "Take your time, sweetie." He smelled like ash, like fire that never went out. Owen's eyes unfocused, staring into memory. He used to hum when he tied the ropes. Something slow. I couldn't move, but I remembered the sound. Nate exchanged a glance with Eliza. Eliza gently pushed a digital recorder closer. "Was there anything else you remember about his voice?" Owen looked down. "It's in that tape. The one from the sheriff's office. I heard it. It was him." Ellie leaned in. "The tape from the old training files," Nate nodded. "The one with Atlas's former handler, Alan Kerr." Atlas, lying flat at Owen's feet, suddenly lifted his head. Eliza pulled out a compact speaker and connected it to her phone. "Let's try it." She played the segment again. It was tinny, grainy, a man speaking low, instructing a dog during training drills. But then came the off-script moment, the part where another male voice cut in with a sharp command. "Pull tighter. He doesn't move until I say." Owen flinched. Atlas stood up, ears locked forward, growling. Owen's voice cracked. "That's him." Eliza turned off the speaker. Silence descended like a dropped curtain. Ellie whispered, "Gary Hudson." Eliza nodded. That clip was never supposed to exist. It was part of Alan Kerr's training footage recovered from the field before he died. But someone deleted parts of the archive. This was found mislabeled. Ellie stood and began snapping pictures. Owen's healing rope burns the stitched cuts on his wrist, the embroidered cloth that had held the child's name. Each click of the shutter was a blow to the veil that had kept this hidden. Outside, the snow started falling again. By midday, Ellie was in the back room of the cabin, her laptop balanced on her knees. Her fingers moved like wildfire. She crafted the headline carefully, hidden in the pines, the boy, the dog, and the millionaire who left them for dead. She blurred Owen's face, shielded his name, and cited sources anonymously. Eliza's badge number excluded, Nate's name redacted. But she included the audio of the voice, the matching patterns of rope burn the missing children reports that never made it to court. She clicked publish. Then she clicked share. And then the internet took over. Thousands of views in an hour. Comments pouring in. Screenshots shared on activist forums. Questions sent to Gary Hudson's corporate sponsors. Back inside the cabin, Atlas remained at Owen's side. He hadn't left the boy for more than 5 minutes since the day they met. At one point, as the wind howled outside, he suddenly stood nose in the air, tail stiff. "What is it, boy?" Nate asked. Atlas moved toward the door, sniffing the seam. Nate followed. Outside, pinned to the cabin's porch by a hunting knife, was a bloodied collar. The tag read, Care A. Nate snatched it down, jaw clenched. Eliza stepped out beside him. "It's Alan's. It was supposed to be in evidence." Nate looked at her. "You said Sheriff Danner handled the transfer of Alan's body." Eliza nodded. "And the evidence. And now this shows up on my porch." Ellie appeared behind them, phone in hand. "You might want to see this." She showed them the feed. Sheriff Danner's office had just posted a statement online, a short one. It read, "Ellie Graves is fabricating documents in an attempt to damage the reputation of a private citizen. An internal investigation is underway." Eliza muttered a curse. "They're trying to silence us again." "We're not staying silent," Nate said. Inside, Owen watched the snow fall. "He's angry," he whispered. "The man with smoke. He knows." Atlas lay beside him again, but this time his head was up, his eyes fixed on the door. Not growling. Waiting. The snow had thickened by dawn, falling in heavy, silent sheets that blanketed the forest in a hush, like the breath held before a scream. The mountains near Timberline Ridge stood as silent sentinels, concealing more than just secrets under their icy skin. The trees whispered with the weight of what was about to come. Nate adjusted his scarf higher as he crouched beside the faint imprint of tire tracks just past the clearing. "He was here," he muttered. Beside him, Atlas lowered his snout to the snow, sniffing in short, deliberate bursts. The golden retriever, once thought dead, now carried the fire of the relentless. His thick, honey-colored coat bristled as he tracked the scent. His body moved low to the ground with practiced precision, a blend of memory and instinct. They were deep into the woods now. Gary Hudson, millionaire philanthropist by title, predator by truth, had discovered their investigation 3 days earlier. The moment Ellie's article went viral, Gary vanished, cutting ties, destroying files, leaving behind only a single lingering trail, a burned-out truck at the edge of rock pine forest, and the faint scent of motor oil soaked into the snow. Nate stood and scanned the horizon. "You sure boy," Atlas barked once, then took off into the deeper wood. Nate followed, gripping the flashlight and radio strapped to his belt, his breath coming out in visible bursts. His boots broke through fresh powder, the wind biting at his coat. Meanwhile, 50 miles away in the town of Stillwater, Sheriff Danner stood before a microphone inside a press conference tent hastily erected beside the courthouse. At 61, Danner wore his silver hair close-cropped and his expression tighter. His jaw worked slightly as he leaned forward. "There is no verified evidence that Mr. Gary Hudson committed any crime," he said, his voice even. "The so-called confession from a minor with known trauma does not constitute proof. We ask the public not to fall victim to media manipulation." Reporters murmured, cameras clicked. Behind the crowd stood Marcy Han, a state-level legal observer with thick glasses, a clipboard, and a permanent frown carved into her pale face. She jotted each phrase down without emotion. To her left was Lieutenant Jerome Flannery, mid-40s, stocky, with a mustache thick as a broom and a posture that screamed lifelong bureaucrat. He looked unconvinced. Danner's voice continued. "The boy, Owen, has not provided credible." He was cut off by a woman's voice. "I have the tapes." All heads turned. Ellie Graves walked forward, camera in hand, flanked by Eliza Moore and 3 other officers from the state's Child Protection Division. Danner's smile twitched. "This is not the time," Eliza stepped past him. "You've had your time, Sheriff. Now it's ours." The room erupted. Back in the forest, Nate and Atlas had moved past the second ridge. The temperature had dropped, breath turned to frost, and even the wind sounded sharper, like ice breaking beneath footfalls. Then Atlas stopped. They had reached a narrow ravine. In the center, hidden beneath an overhang of stone and brush, was a heavy metal grate, old rusted but still locked. Atlas growled low. Nate knelt and brushed snow away, revealing a worn handle partially frozen shut. "Help me out here," he muttered, but Atlas had already begun pawing at the ice. 10 minutes later, they pried it open. Beneath lay a tunnel. They entered with care. The tunnel was cramped, lined with damp concrete and wires that pulsed dimly with emergency lighting. It descended deeper until the air turned stale metallic like blood and rust. Atlas led without hesitation. They turned a corner and found a heavy door ajar. Inside were 3 children, 2 girls, 1 boy, all under 10. One girl had a bandaged arm. The boy had bruises down one side of his face, but all 3 stared at Atlas as if he were something from a dream. A man's voice cracked from the radio Nate wore. "Nate, where are you?" Nate grabbed the mic. "Coordinates 41.2 north, 75.6 west, underground holding site. 3 miners found. Send backup and medics immediately." But Atlas hadn't moved. He was standing at a shelf in the corner. On it was a blood-stained cloth. He sniffed it once, then recoiled, whining, pacing, scratching at the concrete. Nate approached carefully, lifting the cloth. Embroidered on one corner were the initials AK, Alan Kerr, he whispered. Atlas growled again, then whimpered. The sound was broken. Raw. Nate knelt beside him, hand on his fur. "You remember, don't you?" Atlas turned his eyes to Nate. They shimmered. "He doesn't just save the living," Nate murmured. "He searches for the lost." By the time backup arrived, the children were in blankets. Atlas was curled protectively around them, and Nate stood watch like a sentinel of old. Snow had begun to fall again above them, hiding their footsteps, but not their truth. Gary Hudson was still missing, but his secrets weren't. The frost still clung to the lower shadows of the Cascade Hills, but the air held a different weight now, softer as though the land itself had exhaled. Snow melted into rivulets that whispered along the mossy stones, and the trees, once brittle with ice, now glistened with newborn buds. The thaw had come not just to the forest, but to the hearts that had long endured winter's silence. Atop the ridge overlooking Stillwater, a cluster of people gathered in front of the old municipal courthouse. The building, once austere in its gray stone, was now draped with a modest banner, "Justice for the lost, honor for the brave." A small crowd stood around a raised platform, their breath visible in the morning light, their eyes fixed on the golden figure at the center. Atlas, standing proud with his vest polished and ears alert, surveyed the crowd with a calm solemnity. At his side, Owen wore a pressed blue jacket, slightly too big for his small frame, his hair now longer, cheeks fuller. He stood without trembling, one hand lightly resting on Atlas's thick neck. The boy's eyes held something deeper now, a steadiness that had taken root in his bones. The mayor of Stillwater. Margaret Lane, a dignified woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked auburn hair and a voice that carried like clean wind, stepped up to the microphone. Her gray suit hugged her tall frame with elegant simplicity. Today, she began, we honor not just bravery, but resilience. Not just justice, but the voices who refuse to be silenced. She turned to Atlas. This dog, this soul guided us not only through snow and silence, but through fear. He is not just a hero. He is a reminder of what loyalty and love look like when given fully. Applause rippled through the gathering. Behind the crowd, Eliza Moore stood with Ellie Graves and Nate Brennan. Eliza wore her uniform, but her badge now gleamed with the state seal. She had been promoted to head of the newly formed Child Protection and Rescue Task Force. Ellie, dressed in her usual brown coat and jeans, clutched her worn notepad. But today it wasn't to write, it was to witness. Nate wore his old firefighter jacket, the sleeves rolled back, his hands resting loosely in his pockets. His expression, normally weathered and quiet, softened as he looked at Owen. He hadn't stopped being a soldier of grief, but now he was also something else, a father. Later that afternoon, under gentler skies, a smaller gathering stood before a humble gravestone nestled beneath a sycamore tree on the edge of Cascade Haven's property. The earth had been recently turned. The wooden marker bore a simple inscription, Alan Kerr, K9, Officer, Protector, Friend. Atlas approached slowly. His steps were deliberate, his breath steady. He held something in his mouth, a metal tag, scuffed and bent but unmistakable. The old K9 badge from his days with Officer Kerr. With care only a creature who remembers can summon, he placed it among the flowers resting at the base of the stone snowdrop's crocuses and a single white tulip. Behind him, Owen stepped forward, crouching beside Atlas. The boy pressed his forehead gently to the dog's head, his hand cupped around Atlas's ear. "We won't let anyone forget again," he whispered. "Promise me." Atlas gave a soft whine, not of pain, but of memory, a promise spoken in silence. That evening, the lights of Cascade Haven glowed softly through the pine trees. The center, once an abandoned ranger station, had been transformed. Wooden signs marked the newly built cabins, one for animal rescues, one for children in crisis, and another for joint therapy and education. The scent of pine wood and hope lingered in the air. Inside the main cabin, Eliza was helping a small girl named Maribel, no more than 6, with wide green eyes and tangled dark curls, feed a limping tabby cat named Dusty. Maribel was shy, barely spoke, but she followed Eliza like a shadow. Her file said she had been found in an abandoned trailer in North Creek. No parents had come forward. Eliza handed her a spoon with gentle hands. "He only eats if you talk to him while he eats," she said, not untruthfully. Maribel nodded barely above a breath and whispered, "Good kitty." In the background, Ellie was setting up a small reading circle for the older kids. A chalkboard on the wall bore a hand-drawn logo. Voices Found, the outreach program she and Nate had launched to help survivors share their stories safely anonymously and, when ready, out loud. That night, as fire crackled in the hearth and Atlas dozed near Owen's feet, Nate walked the perimeter of the property with a flashlight. He stopped now and then, not because he feared danger, but because it was habit, one he didn't want to let go of. He found Eliza seated on the porch steps, sipping hot cider from a chipped mug. "He's sleeping already?" she asked. "Out like a light." "He's been running around with that goofy little pup all afternoon." She smiled. "He's healing." "So are we," Nate said quietly. The porch light flickered once, then steadied. The wind had settled, the snow no longer fell, and in its place was something rare, the hush of safety. For a moment they sat without words, the kind of silence that comes not from absence but presence. Atlas still beside the boy who saved him as much as he had saved. The boy lifted his head and listened, not for danger but for peace. The door creaked slightly, and Owen appeared, rubbing his eyes. "Nate, yeah, buddy. Can Atlas sleep in my room tonight?" Nate smiled. "Always." Inside, laughter echoed faintly. A girl reading aloud, a dog barking in joy. Somewhere a cat knocking over a can of treats. The center was alive, and spring at long last had opened its doors. Sometimes the greatest miracles wear fur and walk on 4 legs. Through the snow, the silence, and even the shadows of cruelty, Atlas showed us that courage doesn't always roar. It often arrives with quiet loyalty, deep eyes, and a heart willing to protect the broken. What happened in Cascade wasn't just a rescue, it was a revelation, a reminder that even in the darkest places, God can send a helper, a healer, and a hero. In our own lives, we may not always recognize the angels around us. They might not have wings. They might be covered in mud fur or scars. But they are there, guiding us, guarding us, loving us, just like Atlas did. If this story touched your heart, please consider sharing it with someone who believes in second chances. Leave a comment below if you believe that God still works through the least expected. And if you believe in the power of healing, of family, and of faith, write Amen in the comments. May God bless you and your loved ones. And may we all become someone else's miracle, just as Atlas became Owen's. Like, share, subscribe to Kindred Creatures, because sometimes it takes a creature to remind us how human we can be.